Hello, it's 11:34 a.m. on March 26, 2021. I'm going to follow up to today's effort at recharacterization based upon two correspondences I tried to have with former colleagues of mine. It fall, I believe, and understand outside of the specific and exclusive realm of contemplation in what would otherwise have been ascribable under the auspices of somebody else. And present them now for consideration. And I'll say that when you go on the public record, if at some point there becomes revealed to you information that challenges what you had done previously and put into the public realm, I believe it could be considered a sign of an appreciative value, or not just in terms of a financial consideration, but rather a form of community accountability to correct the record. Whether that has to do with a personal political perspective you have and an effort to recontextualize it, or if you put things out as fact and later at some point there is a challenge to your presentation of them as fact, and either new information becomes available or a reconsideration of the original presentation of them as fact is available. It needs to be put on the record, and insofar as it needs to be put on the record, it needs to be acknowledged. I think that this is part of the history of political discourse, and it's one of the reasons why we seek community. We're not meant to be stagnant. We're not meant to be isolated. Indeed, some of the great orators of our history, some of our great leaders, even some of those that were excoriated, were often excoriated by people that would otherwise have been considered in some realms or at some point in time their political allies. People that were previously considered to be allies in political struggle, engaged in processes of self-criticism, and end up turning that critical perspective onto each other. And when they did so, oftentimes there's very relevant critiques, not only in terms of what was going on in the political history at the time, but also in terms of the ethos that ended up defining the movement even after their death. This is one of the things that is part of our legacy, and how it is that when we determine and identify ourselves within a legacy, it is not merely about associations or genetics or pedigree, including pedigree that is institutionally enshrined, but rather our comportment and our commitment, almost a sort of secular concept of faith in works. What do we create with each other, even in a material isolation or a physical isolation, insofar as we're still invested in and concerned with the spirit of the people? So when things come up, including disagreements that can be significant, or a feeling of being slandered or misrepresented comes up, I believe it's a duty, as well as potential opportunity to address it. And for that reason, at some point in the late summer, early fall of 2019, I sent communications to communities I had formerly been involved with and had had contact from for a protracted period of time to give a sort of reconsideration of what were past contributions I had made that had been put on the public record, and that over time I developed a different perspective on. So I'm going to read those. I will say, until this time, I have not received confirmation that these communications were received by the intended entities, which were both publications, a publication based out of Chicago, but the first one is a publication based out of San Francisco. I did not receive any confirmation from them that they received it, and or that they made adjustments according to my request for consideration. And at least one of them has been published publicly online on my blog since. However, I'm going to take this time today to go on the record with them. The first one, and I'm going to read them separately. The first one was for a publication I worked as the English language copy editor at during 2010 and early 2011 in San Francisco, called El Tecolote. In August of 2010, I published an article that was based on my attendance of a community congress, and went to various seminars, and that article was made available for publication in the newspaper, but also was published on a separate site. So this is a response that I wrote regarding that article and sent to them on October 3rd of 2019. Dear Il Tecolote and members of 2010 Community Congress, When a journalist composes a piece, oftentimes it is expected that there will be a certain level of personal disassociation. Of course, modern concepts of objectivity were promulgated by early owners of what later became increasingly corporatized media in a manner much different than community-oriented or politically inclined publications. The early days of journalism were filled with writers who were decided advocates for what they wrote and were often opinionated and passionate. I composed a profile in the 2010 San Francisco Community Congress event. At the time, the staff at El Tecolote, as well as the people with whom I spoke at the conference, knew that I was, in addition to being a reporter, what was considered a consumer of services connected to San Francisco's public health system. It is mentioned in the article that one of the emphasis of the discussion on healthcare discussed the importance of consumer advocates. I sent a copy of the article after publication to the executive director of Progress Foundation after it was published. I had spoken to him directly at the event, informed him that I was both a journalist and a consumer of services by Progress Foundation at the time, and that I wished to speak further with him. He gave me his business card and told me to contact him. I never heard back from him. I mention this as disclosure, but also because nearly 9 years later, and after working for over 4 years as an employee with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, I understand that there was much that was not disclosed about the aims of the San Francisco mental health services system, as well as the public bank that was additionally referenced in the article. I did attend the group meeting on the public bank. Insofar as there would have been a group that re-engaged on a formal level, the conversations and intentions behind the public bank after its mention at the first Community Congress in the 1970s, then I was a part of that event. However, decisions have been made about my contributions without any disclosure, and my past efforts have been used in manners with which I would never approve. How much of this is about securities or other finance decisions made with my work products as a journalist or via my work relationship with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, I do not know, as thus far, after more than 3 years of trying, I have not had any return responses to my efforts to seek assistance with tracking massive misappropriation of my work efforts, including and up to use of fake online accounts misrepresenting my actual work relationship with the San Francisco Department of Public Health. 2 major policy decisions have been engaged by the City and County of San Francisco since I left in December of 2015 that have had far-reaching consequences, not just on my life, but also on the lives of others. 1. The decision to pursue offering bank accounts to both undocumented immigrants and to owners of establishments and others involved with the, quote, legal, end quote, marijuana industry. And 2, a decision to prevent people the ability to refuse to engage in commerce when in the, quote, public way, end quote, while in the Mission District, as was approved at a Board of Supervisors meeting in early 2018 after the death of Mayor Ed Lee, but prior to the election of Mayor London Breed. In short, I believe that to support both undocumented immigrants and a legal marijuana economy is disingenuous. It is exactly consumption habits like the ones that people in the U.S. try to normalize and justify for its potential business contributions or tax contributions that facilitates trafficking syndicates that leverage people's resource access to extortion with criminal activity. Even if that criminal activity is in the course of being reconsidered for its potential legal implications, to attempt to create a false sense of parity and priority concerning supporting people who have need to leave one place to attend to their material needs or to escape violence, with aspects of the normalization and legalization of the marijuana economy is akin to compelling people who need to flee violence to accept association with vice. This not only refuses to acknowledge the righteous remonstrations of colleagues south of the border that say their number one need is for the U.S. to address its overconsumption habits, but it also fails to provide a means by which people who are coming to the country fleeing physical or economic violence or can get their needs met without having to be bargained off for someone else's political agenda, including a political agenda that might very well be completely contrary to who they are or who they want to be. That brings up the second point concerning the Board of Supervisors' decision regarding commerce and the public way in the Mission District. Even before I left, the processes of gentrification were significantly redefining the Mission District. That does not change, however, the historical character and capacity of the Mission District. To require the Mission District to be engaged in commerce in this manner is contemptible. It is racist, and I believe it is actually connected to other serious problems with a covert effort to compel people to accept commercialized sexuality, regardless of whether or not they agree with legitimizing sexual commerce. I acknowledge that I worked at a public health clinic for sex workers and support everyone's civil and human rights. But personal feelings on the sex trade aside, it is completely unacceptable to compel anyone to engage in commercial sexual activity without their consent. It does not matter how many prescription medications you give them after compelling them to accept that they have a mental illness or legal pot you offer them. If they do not want to engage in commercial sexual activity, they should not be required to do so. There are numerous obscure laws in San Francisco that reveal that profligacy of the city and county of San Francisco's relationship to the crypto economy and how it was unrolled through processes of human test subject experimentation. In the intervening years, and because of my work history in public healthcare administration and compliance, I now believe a great number of people were fraudulently diagnosed as mentally ill in order to cover up for how they were engaged in processes of human test subject experimentation intentionally. I believe many people were retaliated against for opposition political views or even for uncovering and attempting to report on public corruption. In fact, the current Russia investigation is a prime example of how all sorts of ulterior financial motives are at play in attempting to address distinctions surrounding concepts of crime, mental competence, and commerce. If anyone had disclosed the role that alleged Russian organized crime syndicates play in financing California's public pension system, including its contributions to San Francisco's public pension system, then I would never have supported, advocated for, or misrepresented the prospects for a San Francisco municipal bank. But no one did. There is a great deal more that was never disclosed. The second to last article I wrote for El Tecolote was supposed to be about domestic violence resources for undocumented immigrant women. When I attempted to move forward on it, however, I was diverted to what I later learned was a transaction for another sheriff's office program, while the context concerning the sheriff in time for the election issue turned into a campaign piece. That says something about the priorities about which I speak now. Not only that, but the last article I wrote about water excess has itself had far-reaching impacts that were completely contrary to not only the intention with which it was written, but what it actually says. I believe the latter happened specifically because of the leverage that was accrued by my former participation in the economy of San Francisco, more for my role as a subject of the economy of the mental health system than anything I might have contributed or been capable of contributing as a citizen or resident. As such, I formally withdraw my support for the San Francisco Municipal Bank or any effort to which it is connected. I do understand that the article is a piece of history of that endeavor and was a published work product that I willingly contributed to El Tecolote, but I do not wish for any further of my human capital contributions to be considered moving forward in connection with the endeavors of with which the San Francisco Municipal Bank or the Community Congress. Just to affirm, I've been outside of the city and county of San Francisco for nearly 4 full years, and I have not heard back from anyone to whom I have registered complaints with the theft of my identity. I intend to remain outside the city and county of San Francisco, California. This was sent at 10:45 a.m. Central Standard Time on October 3rd, 2019. Now, I will only end this by saying that since this time, I have had need to speak with the Internal Revenue Service to get accurate information, at least as registered with the Internal Revenue Service, about my past work history as well as tax record. And it was revealed to me that unbeknownst to me and undisclosed to me, that I was issued a check for what was alleged to be pension benefits from my time working for the city and county of San Francisco. I was never told about this. I never received any information about this. And since the time that that check was issued and presumably sent to the last address I had, nobody from the city and county of San Francisco has gotten back to me on any of the HR matters I have attempted to contact them about. Nobody from the state of California, up to and including the Attorney General's office, has either. And so I'm mentioning this today because whatever was actually going on with my specific relationship with the California pension system to this time has remained unresolved.